Alright YouTube, we're back of course talking some FF7, we're talking some Rebirth, and we are talking about the ending of the game. And the absolute fact that Aerith is Jenova. Okay, not really, but it is something I've wanted to talk about on the channel for quite some time. Damn near since Rebirth released, this concept, this idea kind of popped up. I don't know the exact origins for sure, but I know where I first heard about it was from Maximilian dude. But not directly, because I didn't like watch his playthrough of Rebirth or whatever, or any like kind of theory discussion videos. But I heard people on social media talking about him discussing this theory. And I know at the time, everything that I was seeing was people shitting all over the idea, which I find to be kind of strange because the idea is at least interesting. That doesn't necessarily mean that I subscribe to this theory or think that it's real. But the idea of it being, you know, Jenova at the end of the game instead of the actual Aerith, kind of talking to Cloud, kind of maybe subtly manipulating Cloud and stuff like that is very, very interesting to me. It doesn't necessarily make the ending of the game or the Aerith death sequence and things like that better, because I still have problems with how they ended Rebirth. But retroactively, it can at least make it a little bit interesting. Also, when it comes to people that strongly deny this theory, it's a little bit strange to me because it's directly within the lore that she can do this. And they even kind of tease it a bit in Rebirth, right? That's kind of the whole thing Sephiroth is trying to convince Cloud of throughout Rebirth, is that Tifa died back in Nibelheim, and the Tifa that's been traveling with him this entire time is Jenova taking the form of Tifa.
They say she's a monster, that she can peer inside you, into the very depths of your soul, that she can become those you hate, those you fear, those you love. You know that I killed her. So, who is she?
He's definitely trying to plant that seed in Cloud's head. We know it's not true. Eventually, Cloud knows it's not true too, but he does kind of fall for it in Gongaga.
Those we hate, those we love, those we fear. Jenova would become anyone to fool her prey.
Don't do this!
But I'm no fool.
That can actually be an effective way to manipulate Cloud later on, right? Because you set up this idea that somebody he knows is not truly who they are, right? And then he eventually learns the truth that that is still the same person, so that later on, if Jenova were to take the form of somebody he knows, he wouldn't suspect anything. His guard is down. Again, not saying for sure that's what's happening when it comes to the ending of Rebirth, that Aerith is Jenova, but it could be something the devs themselves are setting up for the story and or for the character of Jenova / Cloud, that they're going to maybe pay off at the end of Rebirth or going into the third game. Because for sure in the third game, if we're following the FF7 story, the original game, then Jenova is going to take the form of somebody eventually. So hopping back to something I mentioned previously, it's within the lore of FF7 that Jenova can take the form of those we love, hate, whatever, to, you know, manipulate us, whatever she wants to do. We learned this within Icicle Inn in the original game. With the tapes we can watch with Professor Gas and Ifalna, she actually talks about Jenova doing this in the past. Specifically with some of the dialogue there that Ifalna has that I find interesting is she talks about her taking the form of dead mothers, dead brothers, specters of the past, right? Which is what Aerith would be by the end of Rebirth, right? She is dead at the end of Rebirth, right? At least based on the original FF7 and the dialogue we get with Ifalna, for the most part, she takes the form of those that are dead. That's not entirely true, though, because we do see her take the form of an alive character later on in the game. But still, for the most part, that's what she seemed to do, at least back in the day with the Cetra and shit. So she has a history of taking the form of those that are dead. And we do actually see this at the end of Rebirth. We get the water barrel scene where we first kind of see, like, Ghost Aerith or whatever. But it rolls directly into Rufus talking to Glenn, who's obviously a dead character as well.
You know, Glenn, I'm on to you. This war's nothing but a ploy to distract me from Sephiroth.
How very astute. Regardless, the plan is already in motion.
Now, in that case, it's more so directly Sephiroth, but when we're talking about them taking forms and manipulating people and whatever, they're kind of one and the same, right? By the time the FF7 stories happen in Jenova, Sephiroth, one and the same. Now, that's not the first time that we have a scene with Rufus and Glenn with Rebirth, right? That does happen at least a few times throughout the game. But it is pretty interesting that they follow up the first, you know, Force Ghost Aerith scene with a Rufus and Glenn scene, which is a scene where there is, you know, Jenova / Sephiroth taking the form of a dead person. Speaking of the first Aerith scene that we get, people have pointed out that the music that plays when Cloud first starts talking to her is kind of ominous, which is a little bit of a weird choice if it's meant to be like a sweet moment. But also right before Cloud starts talking to her, we get that kind of digital glitch effect. We'll say the music is a little bit ominous, but it's not like to the degree of like a Sephiroth theme or something where you're like, you know for sure this is bad stuff happening. There could still be a sweet aspect to it, but I kind of get what people are saying. Also, the glitch effect that Cloud gets isn't always indicative of like Sephiroth intervening or bad things happening. That just happens whenever there's something that challenges Cloud's reality, right? Like whenever Aerith talks about Zack at the park back in Sector 6, right? We get that effect as well.
What's his name? I probably know him.
So when those moments happen to Cloud, it's not always indicative of like Jenova or Sephiroth being around or manipulating shit. But I will say there's a bit of a difference in the sound effects you hear whenever like Aerith says Zack's name and Cloud gets that mental effect versus whenever like Sephiroth appears, or specifically with the Aerith Force Ghost scene that we talked about. There's that kind of high-pitched sound effect, right? And you get that with the Aerith scene at the end of Rebirth. We also see in other scenes whenever Sephiroth appears or there's manipulation happening on Sephiroth's end with like the Gungaga scene whenever Cloud like, breaks and like attacks everybody, right? So I can't speak for every single time a glitch effect happens for Cloud between both Remake and Rebirth. And if it's always the case that the high-pitched sound only happens whenever like Sephiroth is around or bad guy shit is happening or whatever, it's something you guys can definitely let me know. But if that is the case, that you only hear that whenever like Sephiroth is doing something, then it adds a little bit of credibility to this theory because you hear it right before Cloud sees Aerith. I will say though, we played a scene from the Rufus and Glenn conversation towards the end of the game, and whenever you see Sephiroth appear, it makes that glitching sound effect. But also after he shoots Glenn, and you start getting like Glenn talking to him and shit, it does a glitch sound effect a lot too. So it definitely is something in regards to Sephiroth specifically. It's not just a Cloud thing.
How very astute. In the back, just like old times.
Also, to backtrack a little bit more, people have pointed out that during the Jenova Lifeklinger fight, you hear Aerith's theme, which I don't think matters, because this fight in the original FF7 is just straight up Aerith's theme, right? That kind of adds to the moment, adds to the sadness, the tragedy of losing the character. When you're doing this intense boss fight, you're just hearing Aerith's theme. I don't think her theme being a part of the Jenova Lifeklinger fight in any sort of capacity adds anything to the conversation, because that's just what happens in the original game too. Moving to the second scene with Aerith at the end of the game, whenever they're sitting in the grassy field and shit, fixing the tiny Bronco, there's not a lot of things that lean in favor of it being Jenova Aerith. In fact, there's probably multiple things that argue against it. One of the things people point out is that whenever Aerith touches Red 13, he senses her, right? He says her name.
Aerith?
So how could that be Jenova Aerith if he senses the actual Aerith? And I kind of understand what you're saying, but at the same time, if you hop back to the original game, Red 13 gets duped by Sephiroth/Jenova taking the form of somebody else. This happens during the Whirlwind Maze segment of the original FF7. Tifa recommends that we leave the black materia behind with somebody, and you can leave it with either Red 13 or Barret, and no matter who you leave it behind with, they get duped by Sephiroth taking the form of somebody. But specifically the point here is that you can leave it with Red 13, and he doesn't realize that the Tifa he's talking to is not the actual Tifa, right? He falls for the ruse of Sephiroth/Jenova taking the form of somebody. So just because he senses Aerith at the end of Rebirth doesn't mean it has to be the actual Aerith. And to be clear though, I do think the Aerith we see at the end of the game, specifically the second scene, is the actual Aerith for sure. We can maybe have a little bit of a discussion on the first scene we get, but I think the one at the end of the game is definitely actually Aerith. It is weird with the original game that Red 13 would fall for somebody pretending to be Tifa, because he's traveled with Tifa for however long at this point. He's an animal, so he has a heightened sense of like, you know, smell and things like that. You think he'd like notice a difference between them, unless like Sephiroth can turn into, you know, Tifa and smell exactly like her and act exactly like her and things like that, right? Maybe we're just supposed to not think too much of it, but still, it's just one of those things that like stands out to me. That's kind of weird. Maybe another reason why I think the Aerith we see at the end of the game, specifically the second scene, is the actual Aerith and not Jenova Aerith, is because for a lot of that scene, she's doing her own shit absent of Cloud. He's kind of at a distance and he is watching her and looking at her, right? But she's walking around kind of individually interacting with a lot of the characters there, which is a weird thing to do if that was Jenova Aerith, unless she's just trying to put on a front for Cloud since he's watching her. Like the first several minutes of the scene are just kind of Aerith walking around near a lot of the party members, kind of sort of interacting with them, if you want to call it that, right? Until she eventually talks to Cloud towards the end of it. So again, she's kind of doing her own shit and not necessarily like talking to Cloud, trying to manipulate him or whatever Jenova's goal would be. People have also pointed out that with the ending sequence here, whenever the tiny Bronco's flying away, like after they're long gone, she says goodbye to them, which would be kind of a weird thing for Jenova to be doing. If this was just Jenova standing here in a field by herself, why would she need to say goodbye to them? Like, she's not trying to pretend to Cloud that she's real. There's no Cloud here to see her do this. I think a lot of that makes sense, where like the ending sequence, at least the second scene for sure, doesn't give off any sort of ominous vibes that it would even be Jenova at all. And that could be the point too. They're trying to like have some big reveal in the third game that it was Jenova all along. Maybe that could be why they do that, right? But at least with the second scene, I don't get anything that feels evil or potentially Jenova at all, right? With the first scene, again, we have the kind of ominous music, the glitchy effect that usually indicates like Sephiroth or evil shit happening, and kind of the reveal of Aerith, where you see like half her face and it's kind of in the shadow. It's a little bit sort of creepy-ish, if you want to call it that. So you could maybe lean towards the first scene potentially being Jenova, maybe. And that could potentially be where the theory can be true and not true. Maybe one scene is Jenova, one scene is Aerith, right? Kind of like a tug-of-war for Cloud, potentially. Because with that first scene, there is something a little bit kind of weird and off about the Aerith reveal. Just something about the way they show her and like the lighting and things like that. It just gives off a little bit of a vibe. Something about the scene is just a little bit off, where like when you first see her, you only see like half the face. It's in the darkness, and Cloud looks at her, and she's just kind of looking forward for like a couple seconds without even acknowledging him, and like slowly kind of creepily looks towards him and shit. Like there's just something a little bit weird about it. I don't know. The other kind of argument I have against either scene being Jenova Aerith is, what is she doing? Like the idea or the theory is that she's taking the form of Aerith to manipulate Cloud or something, but she's not really manipulating Cloud in either scene or trying to get him to do anything. Like, she's not like, hey, use the black materia, become evil, be one of us, join us, or nothing like that, right? Could make the argument that she's manipulating Cloud, at least in one of those scenes, by taking the form of Aerith to help manipulate him to go after Sephiroth. He wants to do that anyways, but seeing Aerith or talking to Aerith might motivate him more to head north and go after Sephiroth, which is what Sephiroth wants, right? Bring me the black materia. We could really have that discussion either way, right? Because I don't really get the vibe that Cloud's being manipulated at the end of the game through either scene and the dialogue he has with Aerith. But at the same time, you could argue that her taking the form of Aerith is the manipulation. It'd be different if Aerith was the one who mentions that Cloud should go north after Sephiroth, kind of given a direction or whatever, but Cloud's the one that mentions it at the end of the game. So again, he was already doing that anyways.
Now let's go get Sephiroth. He's hiding up north.
North?
Trust me, he is. Soldier's intuition.
People have also pointed out that the dialogue that Cloud and Aerith have in the second scene is just kind of repeated dialogue from either Remake or also Rebirth, with the exception of like one line, I believe. I guess the idea being that if it is Jenova taking the form of Aerith, she's just reusing things that Aerith has said in the past to try to pretend to be Aerith. And there's an interesting idea there, I suppose. But again, kind of similar to, Cloud heading north, he's the one that initiates the old dialogue that they've said in the past.
You gonna be okay getting back?
And if I said I wasn't?
You gonna be okay getting home?
And if I said I wasn't?
I don't think there's anything to that, really. I can kind of see where people are coming from with maybe Jenova using old dialogue that Cloud and Aerith have had, maybe tapping into Cloud's memories or something. But I ultimately think it's just a simple callback. It's the end of the game. Potentially the last time these characters will have a conversation, at least for a long time, unless Cloud's, haunted by Aerith all throughout the third game. I don't know what they're going to do exactly with Cloud thinking that she's still alive or whatever, or at least not accepting her death. Who knows how they'll handle it, right? But at least up until maybe the end or towards the end of the third game, they might not have any dialogue, right? So this is the last time they're going to have a conversation, so it's kind of a cute callback. I think that's all it is. Ultimately, as I said earlier in the video, I don't think that this theory is necessarily true. There are a few things in favor of it that are kind of interesting to talk about, and there's a decent amount of stuff I think that kind of argue against it. But ultimately, I don't think that they would even have the balls to do this anyways. Even if I thought the theory was true and it was really cool or whatever, I don't think they'd go this route. I don't think they'd have, like, as much as I love Remake and Rebirth and FF7 in general, I just don't think they'd have the balls to do this. Like, this is the whole time not actually Aerith. It's Jenova that was manipulating Cloud, some sort of big reveal in the third game. I just don't think it'd happen. Kind of similar to the Tifa being Jenova thing that we got with the trailers leading up to Rebirth. We talked about in the video, jokingly, of course, but, like, what if they did that? What if there was like a reveal at the end of Rebirth, or I guess maybe in the third game, that this entire time Tifa was actually dead in this new telling of the FF7 story, and like it was really Jenova the entire time? Like, what a fucking reveal. That'd be insane, right? They would never do it. It's not going to happen. But what an idea if they were to do that. And kind of similar thing here, right? Like, what if this Aerith at the end of the game was Jenova and kind of like trying to guide Cloud in a particular direction to bring black materia to Sephiroth? There's some interesting ideas there. I just don't think they would do it, unfortunately. I do think you can make a bit of an argument for the first scene potentially being Jenova and or Sephiroth trying to like manipulate Cloud or something like that, with the glitch effect, the music, the ominous way she's revealed, things like that. Something a little bit off about the scene. But I think for sure the second scene is like 100% Aerith. But that, of course, is where I pass off to you guys. This is a pretty old theory. We're just not getting around to it. I don't think we've ever discussed it at all. I don't think I've ever even touched on this idea or theory, even in passing in a video. Maybe, I don't know. It's been like a year and a half or so since Rebirth came out. Damn near. I don't know if I've ever talked about it. So I wanted to like dedicate a video to this. I've been wanting to talk about it for a long time. What are your thoughts? Either way, that's the video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Search works in the description below. If I'm on Twitter, _DashingdavidYT, that's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.